The following is a conversation with Ben Kovar. Ben is a concept designer working in the film industry for about 20 years. He's worked on countless projects such as 300, Fantastic Beasts, Pinocchio, and Wonka. I got to know Ben in person at the Visage Visual Effects Creative Festival in Nairobi, Kenya, where he was also invited as a speaker. Whether hired as an artist at a VFX studio or as a freelancer, Ben's focus is on creating countless sketches and artworks for rapid visual brainstorming of ideas to create consistent worlds for the movies. Typically, this is done directly with the movie's director at the early stages of shaping the film's story and visuals. Ben is an incredible artist with an enormous amount of knowledge and experience in the creative fields and way beyond. I recommend you grab a pen and some paper for sketching during this episode. It's one of the longer ones and you'll be inspired to draw. Thank you, Ben, for taking the time to do this with us and for us. It's always a pleasure to do those deep dives. Stay humble, stay curious. This is the 3D Environment Podcast, and now please enjoy the conversation with Ben Kovar. Alrighty, we are live. It is a pleasure to have you on, Ben.
Hello.
Thank you for doing this. It's fantastic to have you on.
My pleasure.
Nice. So maybe as a very first introduction, just we met for the very first time not too long ago, actually, in Nairobi, Kenya, and that was basically by our mutual colleague and friend Yvonne Mwinde. So we may touch a little bit about that later on, but I've had a fantastic time there, meeting you even the first evening in the hotel lobby.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was an amazing trip.
Yeah, that was in the context of the Visage Visual Effects Festival, Creative Festival in Nairobi, Kenya. For those that want to know a little bit more, there's a podcast episode, I think it's number 2 with Yvonne, the main organizer. Let's hope that it will happen again next year. We'll see.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, so I would say please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and where you're from originally.
Okay, so I was born in London and my background is in animation. When I was a kid, I loved drawing stories, making little kind of films and stuff like that. And it was always kind of what I wanted to do with my career. I mean, kind of storytelling specifically. And so I trained as a CG animator back when this was like a kind of like not new, but like fairly not normal. And I worked as an animator. I was very lucky. I got an animation job more or less straight out of university. But while I was doing that, I was also given the chance to do some concept artwork. Basically, my career was kind of dictated by the rendering speeds on the on the computers, because I would kind of be rendering a preview of a shot and I would be doodling while I was waiting. And literally one day some guy walks by my desk and they needed some concept artwork done. And they just said, you can draw, do you want to do some concept artwork? And that was that, right? So I did, and this was on the second Harry Potter film, The Chamber of Secrets. And so kind of, I got, again, incredibly lucky and got to do some kind of concept artwork on that. And I thought
by doodling, this is crazy.
Yeah. And it's awful because like I talk to students and it's like, so how do you get into the business? And my story of just like, well, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time with a slow computer is not what anybody wants to hear, because it's of no use to anybody else. Yeah, that was it. And after that, I decided that I kind of really enjoyed doing kind of concept artwork. And so after that job finished, the animation job, I started pursuing kind of concept art. And yeah, that was a scary long time ago.
So how long was this phase of kind of entering the industry as a artist or to switch to this to concept art? How long did this take approximately?
It took a while to be established. Again, with luck. I mean, I started off kind of working for a visual effects company called Framestore. And although, I mean, these days Framestore has a very good art department, but then they didn't. And again, this was something that gave me the opportunity. You know, the fact that they kind of needed, you know, somebody to kind of do these drawings, but didn't have people on site. Being at Framestore also meant that like I wasn't kind of a complete stranger to the industry. You know, there were lots of kind of fantastic people there who could kind of advise and who had friends who did this kind of stuff. And so kind of after following Framestore, I did a very brief stint at the Jim Henson's Creature Shop, which at the time was in Camden, in North London. And then after that, it was freelancing for a while, and that wasn't, you know, like you're building up your contacts, you're getting to know people, you'll very much draw anything for money. So yeah, it wasn't all kind of like kind of great concept art or movies. You know, like I did books, games, all sorts of stuff. And then I got my first, as it were, kind of full-time concept gig, which was on Happy Feet. So that was in Australia. And that was where I met Yvonne. So that kind of starts off this story as well.
Yeah. So before jumping to Australia and how that happened, at the beginning of your career in the industry, what were kind of the first landmark project that you were working on? You just mentioned Harry Potter, and what are the other kind of like iconic IPs or iconic movies that you really started working on?
So I'll probably get my chronology all wrong because again, it was a scary long time ago. But there was The Golden Compass. This was like the first attempt to do the Philip Pullman's Dark Materials books on screen. And so I worked on the Bears for that. And like ironically enough, I worked on the Bears for the TV series and kind of like was very eager to do that just because I had a lot of ideas for them. Yeah, so there was that. There was the Children of Dune miniseries, which Jim Henson's did, where I worked on the Navigator. And then there was the kind of the early Harry Potter films, which I should emphasize I was kind of very junior and peripheral, but was still an absolutely amazing experience to work on those.
Yeah. No, I loved the movies. I really did, and I knew that the books, or Harry Potter, the whole series, I knew the books were around, and I was like always meh, kids books. And then I actually went to see the first movie in the cinemas, and I was like, yeah, okay, this really is, it's a cool universe, and
Yes.
so yeah. No, amazing. But going kind of back to Australia and Animal Logic, how did this happen? How or what convinced you or made you kind of move to the other side of the planet? How did this happen?
Well, again, a bit of luck. Like, so I was freelancing in London. Again, kind of starting off in the business. I didn't have a huge number of contacts and was finding it quite frustrating. So I went out to Australia just for a holiday. You know, like I was staying with my father grew up in Oz, so he had a lot of old friends. So I went out, kind of just stayed with some friends of my dad's. And while I was there, somebody just said, "Oh, you should check out this company called Animal Logic. They're doing a film." Again, one of those weird industry things where like it's a secret that everybody knows. So like I knew that they were doing a film about dancing penguins, but you go in and you have to sign God knows how many NDAs and all of that, and then they say kind of like, now this is a massive secret, but we're doing a film about dancing penguins, and you go, oh my God, never. And so yeah, I got a job on that, and it was an environment artist on that. So like I've always been more of a character person. So drawing a lot of icebergs, and later on in the movie, I was promoted to rocks, which kind of I think some of the other artists were quite envious of because we'd all been drawing icebergs for a while, but I was rock boy now,
This is fantastic.
Yeah, but yeah, so that, and then after kind of Happy Feet finished, I kind of stayed on in Australia for a bit, and we did 300. There was like another some incidental work on another one of the Potters. I think the Goblet of Fire, and then some other movies, and a lot of commercials. And it was a good experience. I mean, I think it was like the longest stretch of just head up to that point of just like kind of continuous concept artwork, and met some absolutely amazing people. And yeah, I was out there for about 6 years. I should say Australians hate it when you say out there because it kind of makes it sound as if it's on the moon. So I shouldn't say that.
I mean, you mentioned you're also quite regularly flying between Australia and then the UK kind of multiple times. And it's like this is an ordeal in itself, right?
Yes, although one of the things I kind of discovered on the Kenya trip was that having done that for 6 years, no flight bothers me anymore. Yeah, I think it's 8-9 hours London to Kenya, and it was about 10 hours back, and it's just like, yeah, this isn't a flight. This is a after flying to Australia regularly. Yeah, no flight bothers me anymore. I'm totally flight proof.
Yeah, I would assume. Yeah, so on Happy Feet, you were working together with Lyndon, right?
No, I didn't get to meet Lyndon then. So the art department, yeah. So Happy Feet was a very long project. I mean, I think it was a good few years, and I was really only there for I think the first 1.5 of those. And I think Lyndon, who was one of the animation supervisors, would have come on later and would also have been working in like the animators were kind of downstairs and we were up in the rafters.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, because he's Lyndon Barwa, if I'm not completely butchering the name. He was also one of the guys that we met in Kenya, and I just remembered he was also working on Happy Feet. I didn't know how long this project actually went. Yeah. So how did you get in contact with Yvonne?
Well, I met her through Phil. So Phil's her husband, and Phil was data manager at Animal Logic on Happy Feet. An incredibly stressful job. And Phil is the guy to do it. Like, stuff like that doesn't bother him at all. Phil is a grandmaster in Kung Fu. Like he's actually the real deal. Like he's trained all over the world and stuff. And he was training, wherever he's a kind of compulsive teacher. And he starts a class wherever he goes. And he had a Kung Fu class for the artists at Animal Logic. And I started training with him. We became good friends. I kind of started training with him kind of separately from the class, just because, again, we were just very good friends. And, we go down to the beach on a Saturday morning and do Kung Fu on the beach. And it was absolutely fantastic. And then Yvonne, she joined a bit later. She was matte painting and already a star. I don't think Yvonne even has a trumpet that she would blow, but she's a truly amazing matte painter. She's done some stunning stuff. And yeah, I just got to know them very well. Like we weren't working together, but yeah, like I think that they were, my closest friends in Oz. I mean, they still are very close friends. And yeah, that's just how we got to know each other. We did like a lot of stuff. Like we kind of went hiking in New Zealand. We did the Kung Fu stuff. Yeah, we had a lot of fun, and we went caving. This was, I think, before Yvonne showed up. Like I have this photograph of me and Phil and some other friends of ours. Yeah. And we went out to God, I forget the name of the caves but we went up to these caves in the Blue Mountains, and I think it was like 6 hours caving. And it was absolutely amazing. It was amazing fun. And yeah, that's how I met them.
Nice. Sounds like you had a really, really good time there also. And I just remember regarding Yvonne, somebody told me there were some really fun anecdotes also between you and her specifically. I don't remember all the details, but maybe you can share one or two of those anecdotes.
There was one where we'd been sparring. So Yvonne is also one of Phil's students. And when we would train together, he would make us fight for his amusement. Neither me or Yvonne, like, we're not kind of aggressive, like I'm going to take you to the mat and beat your face in type people. We're just not. So we'd have these, I imagine with hindsight, quite embarrassing fights of us just like kind of trying to hit each other but not hurt each other. And then one time we were out in a cafe or something like that, and Yvonne just had a bruise on her arm, and she said, "This is you. This is you." And there's this guy, this enormous bodybuilder of a guy, just turns on me and he says, have you been beating this woman? And Yvonne just like looks at him with these kind of puppy eyes and just like nods, like slowly. And it's like what? Like on the one hand, like, well, I suppose yes. I had been beating that. I've been trying to
technically,
beat that woman, just like it wasn't a very successful beating, but I was trying. And it was just
amazing.
Obviously we kind of diffused it. And the other thing is, like, as a guy, you don't want to say, well, actually, she kind of was the one who kind of sent me flying, but never mind.
This is amazing. Yeah, that was the anecdote that I heard. I didn't get the full story, but this is hilarious. Yeah, he beat me, sure. Oh, wow.
with flawless technique, I should add. But yeah, it was very funny.
Were there similar instances of these things?
The other one I always think, it wasn't with Yvonne, it was with Phil. There had been some kind of race riots in this part of Sydney where we were training. Phil's black and I'm very, very, very white. And I phoned Phil up, because we'd go down to the beach on Saturday mornings and train, bearing in mind that they've been riots there the other day. Do you want to train? And he's and then he added some words that I won't say on the podcast, but says, I'm not letting these various rude words people stop us from training. So we go down to the beach and we're just doing the sparring, beautiful kind of morning on the beach in Sydney. And suddenly, like, all of these guys just like start converging on us. And it's now my turn to be the victim, right? Because all these guys are white, and it's like, what's going on here? And we were like, guys, this isn't a race riot. This is a kung fu class, right? There's just, and I think they thought that this was like, just the two of us thought we'd have our own private riot, or something like that. But that was also really funny, just because it was, guys, come on.
It's so much projection going on from people. Oh, beautiful.
I mean, it's not funny, but it kind of is. But I just love the notion of we just pass each other on the beach and think, let's just start a riot, just the two of us.
Oh, this is amazing.
In our floral board shorts. Let's do it.
Oh, cool. Nice. A very good start in this episode. All right, let's go into maybe some of the definitions of the terms, so kind of job descriptions, just to move on. So there are different terms like concept designer, concept artist, storyboard artist. We also mentioned matte painting before. Before moving on, just for the audience, so let's define those terms a little bit better and what it is that you actually precisely do.
Concept art is, you basically just help visualize the script. It's like the first draft at visualizing the script. So it's not quite production design, which involves a lot of kind of practicalities. Like, you have to build the sets, you have to kind of work out, how cameras are going to move in and out of these sets. There's a lot of kind of real world stuff to consider if you're production designing, which as a concept artist, you can kind of just leave to somebody else. But concept art is like, here's this moment in the script. Here's this prop. Here's a character. What's it going to look like? And you just come up with concepts. You will be working, like generally these days, you will either be, with the art department. So you'll be working with the production designer or the costume designer, or you will be in visual effects. I mean, a lot of stuff at the moment, because so much stuff is going to be in visual effects. A lot of people, I mean, particularly if like you're looking for like a full-time job as opposed to a freelancing gig, will end up in a company like Framestore or ILM, or in a games company where, of course, like everything has to be designed. And you'll be coming up with concepts, ideas for what stuff will look like and what story moments will look like. Concept designer, it's not a real thing. Some of us who kind of want to kind of progress our careers a little bit, we might start saying concept designers as opposed to concept artists. And I think it's like that is where you're looking at kind of general ideas rather than anything more specific. So, for example, the concept artist might just be given, let's say, okay, here's a prop. This is a specific prop. What's this prop going to look like? Whereas a concept designer, you're saying, well, okay, here's Star Trek, and we're going to visit this world. What's this world going to be like? It's kind of broader strokes, and there will be lots of specifics to get into. I mean, there'll be lots of props in that world, but it's kind of just broader ideas. It's kind of like you're working with the director, you're working sometimes with the script writer, and it's kind of world building. It's more kind of like broader ideas. So, for example, I recently worked on Wonka, the Paul King, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory prequel. And in that, there was a lot of stuff where it's like, okay, we're going into his chocolate shop. Beyond the design of it, what's the architecture going to be like? So what's happening in this space? You'd come up with like just lots of ideas for what it could be. Maybe it's clouds made of candy floss. Maybe it's the kiosk where the cash register is. It's like it's under a big mushroom. It's just ideas like that, like very rough sketches. Most of them don't go anywhere. And you're kind of just feeding the director stuff, and the director will kind of like mull it over and take what they like and kind of make it their own. If one of those things, like the mushroom kiosk, for example, becomes like, yes, this is going to be a thing, then it becomes more concept art. Okay, now somebody has to design what that's going to look like.
I feel a lot of kind of earlier stage work where it's just kind of brainstorming. What could it be? And then maybe if some of the things are fleshed out, then you kind of go in and you start designing the individual items and get a little bit more concrete.
Yes, absolutely.
And which of, would you say you are more at the very beginning to just kind of brainstorm?
Yes, at the moment, and certainly kind of it's the type of work I most enjoy, is that ideas stuff.
Because I think that's really important to understand these two phases. Because if you look at, let's say, if you search on the web or on ArtStation or wherever for concept art, it's usually kind of very moody environments, or it's like usually you see the full frame. You see an environment, you see mountains, you see a city, you see a character. Sometimes you just see individual characters and so on, or a creature. But kind of the world building aspect, that is kind of you take individual items and just solely focus on them. From what I saw from your work and from your presentation, you heavily focus on that, and then you iterate on these items. Usually concept art for me, kind of the typical notion of it, what it means of the term, is usually kind of also more painterly, atmospheric. But from you basically work just with in a lot of the work, it's just a pen and you do some black and white sketches, right?
I should say that this kind of super early stage stuff it's definitely a luxury that not all productions have. In a lot of jobs, there's just not the budget all the time. And sometimes it's not necessary. It's like, there's going to be this specific prop.
Yeah.
So you don't need much kind of musing about what that prop is going to be. You just need to know what it's going to be like. And in that case, it becomes a piece of product design, essentially. You know how it has to perform, what it needs to do. But I think also like the stuff that you see on ArtStation, I suppose kind of like different types of concept work. There's the work that's just within the production. And most of the stuff that you've seen of mine, like the rough sketches stuff, that's just in the production. It's never meant for anybody outside to see. Out of context, it probably doesn't mean very much. It's really there just for discussion, with like the director, the production designer, or for communication. So it just has to be clear.
Yeah.
It doesn't need kind of any artistic flourishes. That stuff comes later. But I think like the stuff that you see on ArtStation, I mean, there's this element where if you're just in the room working with the director and nobody else is seeing this stuff, as long as what you're drawing is very clear, it's absolutely fine. But there's the element later on, if you're presenting to the studio or you just want stuff to show off on your ArtStation page to show the kind of artist you can be, I think that's when you get stuff that's much more polished, much more finished. Again, it depends on what it is that you're doing on the show. Because like if you look at something like Lord of the Rings or Marvel films where like the finished shot, there's going to be a lot of visual effects. It's like a highly finished piece of concept art is what that shot's going to look like on screen. It's very highly art directed. It's going to be used as a guide for visual effects, it's going to be used to sell the film. That stuff is going to be much more polished than stuff which is just in the production, and it's like kind of like what's going to happen here, and you do a few sketches.
I see. The thing then why I'm bringing this up is because this is kind of you could say the grunt work. It doesn't need to be polished or artistically quote unquote beautiful. It needs to serve a purpose. It's like a tool. It's an instrument in itself. So in a portfolio, to actually showcase what it is that you are actually very strong at, and let's say which type of work you would like to get hired for, would have to resemble most what you're actually kind of showcase in a portfolio. Now, obviously, if you just do, and this is also how you were, or when showing or when creating some doodles, this is how you were discovered back then, right? But I would almost assume that showcasing just the doodles, and they're incredibly important, they could be hindering you if they appear in a portfolio, which is a bad dynamic. But I would assume that this is a dynamic why people would say people will assume that if I'm showing some beautifully rendered pencil drawings or that are also colorized a little bit, that this will imply that I'm very good at kind of fast-paced, iterative concept workflows. Or how do you tackle this specifically in kind of communicating this difference?
It's a good question. And the answer is I haven't completely solved this. My portfolio does look like I've just been doodling, in large part because I have just been doodling. But also like out of context, the sketches don't mean much. Like if you just come to them just blind, like you can put them on Instagram or whatever and write a long descriptive piece as to what's going on. But ideally, if you're setting yourself for this kind of work, you need to be able to get in front of the person who's going to be working with you and talk them through what you do and get to know them and kind of get to like working with them. So it's a bit of a catch-22. Like you have to get in front of them and be able to kind of explain what you've been doing and what you do. And if they can see the value of that, that's fantastic. The downside for, I think, this kind of portfolio, or at least one of them, is that if you are applying to like a position where you're going to get vetted by the people you're not going to be working with, like kind of HR or whatever like that, and a lot of, certainly with games and stuff, kind of like the concept art jobs are filled that way, I think, with big companies. You'll never get through those stages, because it's like, it doesn't matter if you've got 20 years of experience and a massive slew of credits. Like if you can't demonstrate what they need, they're not going to hire you.
Yeah.
And with films and games and stuff, it is all about delivering at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think that's the most important thing. Also for the upcoming ICE conference, October 1st to 3rd in 2024, we also decided on the third day to do portfolio reviews, or like the whole third day, which is like 3.5 hours or so. Also for a specific reasons, exactly to address those things with what's the purpose of a portfolio. You want to get hired, so it has to be actually relevant for the position that you're applying for. And I think it's incredibly strong if you are basically putting just quote unquote doodles, well-explained doodles, in a portfolio. This is such a powerful statement because you're completely going against the stream of most kind of classic, beautiful portfolios. I think if I would look at a portfolio, it has to be well designed, but and obviously you just mentioned the kind of the film credits, they help, right? But even that in itself, if I were a concept artist, what I would probably do is, if I had worked on 2 or 3 films, what I would probably do is just put, I don't know, Harry Potter and Goblet of Fire, just a logo, and then I would sketch myself what was my role. So I kind of, this is Matt. I'm working at Frame Store, and then actually showing some of those images. Kind of that also the intent of the portfolio. You convey the intent by actually also doing it within the portfolio. I'm very precise in those types of communications, right? And this is what the intent is, and an HR person will obviously pick up on that because you're very, very clear.
Without any disrespect to HR people,
Go ahead.
I don't quite think so. No, but like, I think that if you're looking at portfolios, like you say, like it has to speak to the job. It's like kind of like what are we hiring you for? And like if you are, let's say you're doing a computer game, you don't need lots of doodles. You have a world to design. You need broad strokes, environmental design, and then you need specifics. And so you will look for that stuff in the portfolio. It's like finished artwork is important, right? You know, like it shows that you can do lighting and composition. It shows that you're technically astute. I think the portfolio of just sketches out of context, and of course, like there's a question about, are people going to read the explanations? I mean, I think, you know, when you're looking for lots of portfolios, the images are going to speak first, right? Nobody's going to read the description. So I think portfolio, which is just sketches, on a table of other portfolios, is going to look incomplete. Again, it's a bit different when you've been in the business a while. You might be getting recommendations and stuff like that, and you know, you're working with people you know before. But I think if you're a student, say, you want to be showing your best work.
I agree. If you're not specialized, I mean, the example I mentioned before with just in your case of this is what you do best, this is what you are best with, is kind of the doodly type of work. But then, of course, you have other expertises, you have the whole dialogue and so on, but it has to paint the full picture.
The thing is with the doodly type of work is that it's not about the drawings. I mean, it's about the ideas. And at the end of the day, like if the person is looking for somebody to develop ideas with, they look at these sketches and they see ideas that they like. I think that's when that kind of portfolio will shine. The person looking at it has to appreciate the ideas or has to like the ideas. You know, whoever's this is, I like the way their mind works. Like I've done lots of portfolio reviews, and generally speaking, the technical quality of the work is almost without exception really, really good. You know, like there's nothing I can advise these kids on in terms of like quality of their work. So what you look for then is the ideas. And the ones who have good ideas, you know, they stand out like, you know, like something that stands out. You know, it stands out like the Matterhorn would in Holland, right? You know, to use,
you'll know it when you see it.
You'll know it when you see it. And one of the things I always say to students, it is like right now that there's so much kind of concept artwork. Like when I was starting off, like I didn't even know this was a job until this guy walked by my desk. But now it's like people want to be doing this kind of concept art job. And there's sites like ArtStation, and there's tutorials online. The danger here is that you get people who are very technically skilled, but who essentially you can't tell one from the other. The work is fantastic, but they're all producing the same kind of thing because the references are limited to ArtStation.
Yeah.
What I think kind of connects like, you know, the rough sketches to what makes a good portfolio is like it's the ideas. I love seeing sketches in a portfolio, but like you want to see what you're looking for then is not how well they can draw, it's how well they think. And there are people like that who you know, they just aesthetically they design beautiful stuff. Then there are people who just like, you know, they just think different, and both of those are really valuable in the context. They might not be necessary for every job, but they're all kind of equally valid. But I think that the main thing, yeah, if you're presenting a portfolio full of sketches, I wouldn't do it broadly speaking just because like you want your portfolio to appeal to the most people. But it's got to be about the ideas. You know, like if I was hiring, I don't actually care how well you draw because like the drawing is ultimately it's communication, at least in a production. If you're doing a piece of artwork to put on ArtStation or to sell, different thing. But in the context of a production, it's communication. Does it sell the idea? You know, you see some very rough stuff that communicates the idea perfectly. Yeah, it's all about, is it good ideas? That's at the end of the day, at least from my point of view, what I look for if I'm doing portfolio reviews. And if it's rough sketches, that's fine, but the ideas have to be good. And you accept that some people will want finished artwork for whatever reason. They want somebody who's going to visualize their shots. You know, they want somebody who can describe this region of their open world computer game with a series of amazing kind of environmental studies and stuff. And those are certain types of job. And then there are jobs where it's just like, well, what's this open world even going to be like? Is everyone flying around in balloons? What is it? And that's more where like, you know, the rough sketches and stuff kind of comes in.
That's the actual process of world building. Kind of.
Yes. Yeah. Rather than Speed, it's great. Obviously, people are on deadlines and stuff. Speed is fantastic, but like speed is really there because it's like, you want to just find out what works. Kind of, you want to try ideas out and assess them, and you don't want to invest too much in any one idea and be precious about it, which is why rough sketches works. I've been on shows where the emphasis has been on finished artwork too soon, and the result is a lot of effort to discover what you're not going to do. And if you're in an environment where you can just be sketching and it's like, hey, how about this? And when I say sketching, I know people who sketch in 3D, use Blender or something like that, and they just have the tool set down to the point where they can just go in and, like in an hour or so, produce an idea. Very, very rough, but it's enough that it's yes, I see what this is about. We can talk about this. Again, depending on the project, there is an advantage in being rough, which is that you are inviting conversation with the client. Clients are not always thundering in there with kind of, my will is the way it's going to be. Like a lot of them, they're still thinking about it themselves. And the nice thing about rough drawings is, firstly, people can interpret them their own way. They might interpret something other than what it's supposed to be, or what you wanted it to be, which, like, as an artist, you think, oh my God, it doesn't even, like somebody looks at your drawing and they go, what is that? Like, no, literally, what is it? I don't know what you're getting at. But like, if they see something different in the rough sketch and it's something they like, I mean, that's great as well, right? I mean, that's advanced the conversation. But also, it's just like people feel more comfortable, like, just talking about rough ideas and stuff like that. It makes a much more kind of collegiate atmosphere to work in, because nobody's going to be offended. Like, it's just, they're just rough sketches. They're completely disposable.
You mentioned 2 points. Just the last point, I think, is really important, that it's a tool. It's not kind of, this is my artist impression of how it should be, or a proposal of how it should be. It's more about the process. And this is also liberating because it's enabling actually the process in the people that have the final decision. So it's a support tool for their purpose. And you want to have want to have a good relationship with those. So the role in that specific moment is to actually be a catalyst for brainstorming ideas.
Yes.
And this leads me actually into the second point, is that there are two types of artists, you could say, to just put it into like black and white, two sections. One that is actually okay with this, and they realize their role in this, to actually knowing that they are just this catalyst for brainstorming and helping to put ideas on the table for other people to choose faster. Sure, sometimes bring in some new inputs that another person would never have thought of, but that's kind of the description of the role. The other side is, if people are kind of, you would say, fine artists, that they hold this piece of art very dearly and it cannot be changed because, I don't know, it expresses them or their art as an individual piece of art. I think, especially early on for, let's say, career choices, I think it's really important to be aware of those two things, because if you are, let's say, more a fine artist and then you go into this direction of, or this line of work where you're just basically there to help, being a catalyst and to support the thought process of a person or of an entire team, then you will be miserable, I would say, because it's hard to detach and take yourself out of the equation, which is necessary for concept art or design, I would say.
It's one reason why I prefer the term concept designer to concept artist, is that like, I think design does imply a process.
Yes.
But I think, like, if you're the kind of person who, yes, this might work and I won't accept changes and this is how it has to be, you're not going to work in this business, in the film business, or I imagine the game business either. Yeah, it's definitely not for you. You don't want to get to the point where you don't care at all. It's just, you're just churning out ideas.
Yes.
So I don't know what the balance is, but yes, like, if you're the kind of person who, there's this wonderful Tony Hancock film called The Rebel. It's an old comedy where he's a really awful artist. And he meets this guy in Paris, and he's talking about his work, and he has this wonderful line where he says, "Every brushstroke is torn out of my flesh."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's like that kind of guy is not going to go well in the film business.
Yeah.
I'd love to say it at some point in my life, but it's not for you. Like you have to. Well, no, you don't have to, but like you have to be prepared to take criticism, and hopefully, you will be in an environment and with people for whom the criticism is itself invigorating. I've got to the point where it is precisely the discussion I enjoy, because you just learn stuff, and you learn stuff all the time, and it's not always like big lessons, but it's just like I just hadn't thought of that, like kind of on a set with a director, and just like like I'm not doing anything, I'm just kind of listening, and again it's just like he's talking to the production designer and the DOP, and it's just stuff about the practicalities of how you shoot something, which I didn't know. Like, okay, make note. Like when I'm working, I will try to kind of accommodate this stuff. But yeah, like if you're just sitting there and you're just doing your art, it doesn't matter. Personally speaking, it is the discussion I enjoy. Like when you get in with a group of people who you enjoy working with, and really there's like it's not an ego. There's no ego thing. Like you don't care whose idea is going to win. And to be honest, with most of these projects, by the end, you can't really claim it's like they can't say, "Oh, this is mine. I did this." It's like, no, you were a part of it, and hopefully a vital part, and it wouldn't be the same without you. But no, you're making something with other people, and that's really good fun. It's really good fun. I mean, I think kind of it's something that you can easily lose sight of, and it is in a production context, there will be artwork for presentation and stuff like that, but the fun stuff is the conversation.
Yep. No, I agree. I absolutely agree. So when looking at concept design or an advanced concept designer, as you are, maybe also independent of the industry, what's the difference between that role and art director? So in games, very often you have an art director that dictates basically the overall look and style of a game, and feel and mood and so on, which is less. I don't think that's a role that is very existing kind of in the film industry, or maybe just partially or a small portion. But then also you have art directors in, I don't know, in the advertisement industry to just take everything together and make it a whole in the end. Or maybe client side. Maybe there are art directors client side on the film studio side that basically orchestrate the work of the different or the individual studios or visual effects vendors that will be working on the movie. What would you say is the difference between the role of a concept designer and an art director?
I think it's what you just said. The difference between like a junior concept artist and a senior concept artist, it's a very flat structure, really. I mean, there's not a huge difference. Is experience. Mm-hmm. You're a known quantity. You can be trusted to deliver. You maybe require less oversight. You're reliable. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows you. Yeah, hopefully you grow as an artist. But I mean, I know plenty of junior artists who are absolutely way beyond me, and I don't think kind of like the quality of the work is necessarily a seniority thing at all. Mm-hmm. And there are art directors in film. The role is maybe a bit more diffuse than it is specifically in games, because there's lots of different heads. There's a production designer who will have art directors, and there will be a visual effects art director, and there'll be visual effects supervisors who will act as art directors. And of course, there's the director who, like some directors, are more art directory than others. Yep. So the structure is less clear. It kind of works itself out on each job. But generally speaking, the art director's job is the overall responsibility for the look. You're developing the brief, I suppose, first and foremost. It's like, what kind of look are we going for? Like I want this to be kind of shot in the style of a German expressionist film from the 30s. And then the art director's job is to make sure that, everyone's in that space. That there's not this one guy who's going SpongeBob and SquarePants. I'm trying to think what the least German expressionist thing is. And you're really great within that context. And again, like there's art direction and there's art direction. Speaking of German expressionist, Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which is an amazingly beautifully art-directed film. But you also get films where like the art direction is less apparent, and very often it's the art direction is how you make the film look completely artless. You get those wonderful films where it just feels completely natural. I mean, in many ways
Yeah.
harder,
Yeah.
right? Because it's just like you're aiming for, there's been any thought at all going into this.
That's actually also something that we internally at Urban, with the content that we're creating, like the buildings and the assets and so on. We discussed this multiple times, that we are trying to create content that is absolutely just photorealistic, but style-less, because it has by far most different applications, because they don't have to. Smurf Village just looks exactly like Smurf Village, and it has to look like that. You cannot take a realistic oil tank and put it in there, right? And so we're kind of trying to work style less or without style. And that actually, a couple of years ago, I had a senior artist that was working in our team, and he actually asked, well, why don't we have an art director? I said, well, first of all, finances. And second of all, I don't think we need one, because we don't want to work with a specific style, because we just want to go for kind of full-blown photorealism.
So even though a part of an art director's job, I mean, it's just getting the right person. If you hire somebody who's obsessed with making Metropolis, you're going to have a very hard time. But there's also an element of attention to detail, of keeping on the brief. Like, I'm always go over the line. If I have an idea, I'm like a Labrador and I'm just chasing it. I often need an art director to kind of just go, no, this is not what we're doing. That's a skill as well. Kind of like knowing, like, attention to detail within the world. And there's multiple levels of that. There's like research, like, you're doing something period. That's not right. Those didn't come in until the 80s. There's all the stuff that creates time and place, like window frames, lighting fixtures, all of that kind of stuff. There's just a sense of what looks natural, what doesn't, what's too far and what's not. And so you do work on projects where it's like the feedback will precisely be that this looks too designed. Yeah, it's not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just that this looks too designed. It looks too contrived. And they want something which looks like it's just been found or something like that. Neil Blomkamp, the guy who did like District 9 and stuff, he's fantastic at kind of creating these worlds where stuff feels like it's just is. Well, still looking fantastic and stuff, but like it's kind of a used world. And I'm sure that that's probably not as easy as it looks. Not that it looks easy, just, but yeah, God, I could do that. Don't know what the fuss is about. Another example, which we both saw, the presentation on the Creator when we were in Nairobi, and there again, I mean, that again, a very beautifully art directed film, but also, kind of fantastic examples of how they built the make believe on all of these fantastic, this kind of muddy reality sets that they shot. They weren't sets, right? They were like locations that they shot in Thailand, like the garment factory and stuff. Stuff which just grounded everything. Then they riffed off that. So yeah, that's kind of art direction as well. I think in many ways much harder, because it requires this ferocious discipline that you're not going to indulge yourself and just suddenly you're completely in service to the project that you're trying to achieve. And the result is something which is, if you do your job well, doesn't look like anyone designed it at all. Or it looks like, and again, kind of coming back to the kind of work you do, it looks like the result of thousands of designers working over thousands of years, not talking to each other, maybe vaguely aware of what each other's doing. And the result is this thing. That's really not easy. And again, that's like part of an art director's and production designer's job, will be that oversight.
This leads me to two follow-up questions. Again, would you say that in the role of an art director, the art director can be a bit more, let's say, of the fine arts type in general, because the responsibility maybe is a bit bigger, or in the sense of that they can push their art style a little bit further into the project by being a little bit more, let's say, not egocentric, but just a little bit more pushy in general? Or would you say this depends on the role? That, for example, if in a game studio, I don't know, there's no direct boss that supervises the art, so that there it's actually a bit more mandatory to manage things, while in a film studio there's always a client that has the final say. How would you say, or how do you see the dynamic there?
I think it depends on the project. You do get, I forget the guy's name, so forgive me, but there's a particular artist at Arcane Studios whose style has influenced. So that they did games Dishonored 2, beautifully art directed games, and this is very much the stamp of, I think, the art director they have there. It's very much his mark on this work. So you do get that on occasion, and then you get again jobs where the art director is more invisible, but not if you're building a world that's less obviously art directed. Then that person is going to be more invisible. I think it can often depend on, let's say that you're a concept artist advancing your career. Yes, you're most likely going to get that art director job because your own work demonstrates that you have a really good eye, you've got a great aesthetic sense, you can critique other artists. The ability to actually talk to people and critique people and stuff like that over and above your own skill set is also very important. I mean, kind of working with people is a very important part of the job. If you are going to stay in your attic covered in paint, you're just like, I don't care how good an artist you are. I mean, and I do know a lot of people who are absolutely amazing artists, but will never be art directors, precisely because they don't care about the other stuff. But so it depends on the project. I mean, I think that there'll be some where you might not do any artwork at all. Like if you're working on a movie set, say, maybe you're not a painter, maybe your background is in photography, maybe your background is as an architect or something like that. And again, it's like it's kind of other quality. It's your eye, it's your attention to detail, it's understanding the brief and sticking to it. I'll probably be proven wrong now, but like a film like Scorsese's Goodfellas, again, beautifully art-directed film, right? But I doubt that there was tons of concept artwork there. It was probably kind of like methodical world building, like researching the period, lots of photographs, kind of props, sets, just the accretion of tons of stuff, rather than ages spent with concept artists kind of designing everything. I imagine it was a more organic thing. I mean, I may well be proved wrong. Whereas in a game, of course, like everything's been built from scratch and everything has to be designed. And so there's going to be like a more of a specific design art director kind of involved in that. But then you have a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, which again, beautifully art directed, and yet the thing that floors me about that game is just how natural everything feels. Like it's just a mess. And again, like that's art direction too. And again, happy to be proven wrong, but like I imagine that there would have been the broad strokes concept art work, which would have been art directed to a certain level, and then there will be a lot of art direction when they're just building those worlds in 3D. It's like, let's have more clutter there. These windows should be dirtier, tons of probably more specific direction than that. And then you read kind of like crazy examples of art direction, like kind of the one of my favorites is Kurosawa, like on some of his samurai films, that they would kind of methodically stain the teacup. And again, it's like, is anyone going to notice? But then I suppose, there's also this element of just like, it just helps the actor, you've got this kind of prop that kind of feels real and all of that. And I imagine these days when almost nothing on set is real, kind of real stuff is something kind of actors appreciate. It depends on the project. Like, I don't think an art director necessarily needs to be making amazing artwork, whether it's by hand or digital painting or whatever. But they have to have the eye, and creating artwork's one way that you develop the eye and demonstrate that you have it.
Yeah, and so the second question regarding this, also regarding the art direction. At the moment, you describe yourself as concept designer. What would stop you or prevent you from saying, I am an art director? Or let's say, try to go more for art director roles? What's the dynamic there with you personally?
In terms of not calling myself an art director, just because I haven't done the job, and I don't think you should claim to be somewhere you haven't actually done it. I mean, there's kind of
so you would say it's not just a description of the type of work that you're doing, but it's kind of literally a job kind of position.
No. Well, I mean, do you actually have to be art directing some? I mean, particularly in the creative business, it's very easy to just call yourself. I think if you're going to call yourself a film director and you've never picked up a camera, I think that's a bit cheeky. And likewise, I think if you're going to call yourself an art director, you should have done the job.
No, fair enough. But then maybe I can rephrase the question in kind of, would you personally move on, or do you see yourself to become an art director eventually? Or what would stop you to do that?
It's certainly something I'd love to do. I think kind of bearing my heart. One of the things which is stopping me is the way that my career has developed, which is, of course, it's my responsibility. But because I have gone into this ideas, this kind of rougher sketches kind of things. Again, like, you have to demonstrate that you can do the job. I don't think anyone is going to give you an art director post off sketches, because the art director has to be concerned with the finished image, and you have to show that you can produce the finished image. So I think it's partially a question of the portfolio. And I think also the rough sketches, or rather just the pure ideas stuff, is also some distance away from just the practicalities of the art director. I mean, that just doing the ideas is an example of that thing I was saying, like, you have to, the art director has to be kind of purely in the service of the brief, whereas the ideas and stuff, you're kind of trying to find the brief.
Yeah,
you're certainly kind of working a bit outside it, or a bit ahead of it. I think there's reasons as to why.
So never say never, right?
Oh no, I would certainly never say never. I mean, I would love the opportunity, but I think these are the reasons why, kind of, as yet, I haven't done it.
Now, a lot of people pretty much very early on in their lives, they say, well, I can't draw. And then they don't try, and this may even potentially stop them from pursuing certain types of careers that they might actually enjoy very much. Did you ever have this kind of with drawing, sketching, and so on, that you almost this, I don't feel I have the level and I will never be good enough, and so on? Or did you eventually, or did you at a specific point in time have kind of a breakthrough moment where something clicked and you say, okay, yeah, I think this is going to work?
Like, as a kid, I just always drew. Like, I just did. I didn't think about it as a job. I had no end in mind. I just loved drawing. I never really kind of thought of myself as an artist. In fact, in many ways, I still don't. I drew because I liked the story stuff. So I kind of was more about, like, I loved what I was drawing rather than the drawing itself. I think in many ways this has held me back as an artist. I think kind of like it's good if you have to really work at it, because you get better. I think if it's just something that you've done for fun, you can never develop that discipline. There's a difference between, I think, talent and skill. And I think skill will get you further. And skill, your talent helps, but skill you really have to work at. There's a potential trap, I think, if you try to kind of coast on talent alone. But to anyone who's kind of thinking, oh, I want to get into this, but I can't draw. Firstly, like, what do you mean can't draw? Can't draw like Da Vinci? Well,
it's a good question.
like it's like neither can I. It's like what do you want to do? Like one thing, if you enjoy doing it, I think this is the number one thing. Like, if you enjoy doing it, do it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll make a career out of it, but it's certainly no reason to stop. And then it's like, yeah, what do you want to do? Like if you're wanting to just, you're doing artwork for the pleasure of doing artwork, who cares? I don't mean who cares that you're doing it. Who cares that it's, it's not the Mona Lisa? Like kind of do it for its own sake. Like, if you want to do it professionally, yes, you have to. Again, it's like, what are you trying to do? It's about communication. Like, so I know some people who don't draw at all. They just work in 3D, and they are every bit as capable of imagining and sketching and trying stuff out in 3D. It's one of the skills I personally envy the most. It's these guys who can just, they sit down in front of Blender or ZBrush and they sketch. I can sit down in front of these things, like, if I know what I'm doing, like, I know what I'm trying to do, after much swearing, I'll get somewhere near it, maybe. But these guys, they can just sketch. Like, it's not that they can't draw. I mean, I know a lot of them can draw. It's just, this is just the medium that they're quickest in, and that they get the most. Again, like, if you're doing it professionally, your aim is to produce ideas and communicate ideas. And so don't be precious about, like, how you do that. I mean, again, kind of coming back to that talk we both saw on The Creator, there they were, they were shooting frames, and then they were sketching on top of the frames. They were working kind of like in a non-precious kind of way to kind of make the film they wanted to make. And again, how do you want to communicate your ideas? So long as they're your ideas. If you're just going to be kind of copying somebody else's photograph or something, that's obviously not your ideas. If you just want to communicate your ideas, I think drawing is a foundational skill. And I think if you're an artist, you should draw. Not everyone is going to be able to draw great. And there are other forms of art, and there are other ways to communicate your ideas. if you want to kind of be a concept artist, it's about the ideas and it's about being able to communicate the ideas. And then there's this extra level of presentation, of making a really great image, which is, again, something which is important. Like if you're pitching the project, if you are trying to sell something, be able to produce a beautifully polished, amazing piece of artwork is also very important. But I think kind of I'm not kind of like, the best drawer in the world. I don't think that should stop anybody. And then in answer to that, do I kind of ever think, what am I doing? Yeah, every day, really. Just, every day. Like it's kind of, I don't think any artist ever, maybe there's this kind of enlightenment state where you get to where you're so supremely confident in both in your ability to kind of come up with the ideas and produce the artwork. But I imagine most people, up to the point that the pen touches the paper, are undergoing a minor panic attack, thinking, is anything gonna come out, right?
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people think, and I know it's really hard to detach from this, but there's this kind of a hypothetical criticism of people that might not deem our work or the drawing good enough, which already stops actually trying. So how are you going to get good at something if you're scared of taking the first step?
Yeah.
And I think that's, I don't know why, but in human psychology, this is something that is really dominant. And drawing is one of those fantastic examples. Oh, yeah, I can't draw. Why don't you try? Well, it will not be good. So, yeah, it's a conundrum, right? And I also asked this question because I did have some sort of breakthrough moment, actually, when I was doing an architectural internship. And when I saw my back then boss sketch or draw architectural sketches. And he just had this like a fountain pen and some kind of the transparent sketching paper. And to me, it looked like it wasn't art. It was just like a kind of a technical description, very not beautiful, but there was a very strong intent behind every line.
Yeah.
And I also had this connotation I found, because it was a fountain pen, that it's kind of the tool. It wasn't just a pencil or just a pen. It was a fountain pen. And that in itself made it more deliberate.
Yes.
And that was the reason why back then, so the internship was in 2003 and 2004 and 2005. I was there working twice. And that was the reason why then in 2005 I actually bought a really nice fountain pen after that internship, after I realized what this made with me.
I completely agree. I much prefer drawing with a pen than a pencil, in part because it makes me commit. And there is something, but you then maybe stop fretting over every line, every mark that you're making, and kind of concentrate on what you're trying to do. Yeah, you can't take it back, right?
You cannot press Control Z.
Yes.
I had this multiple times also, sketching physically on a paper and then pressing Control Z on the keyboard on the laptop next to it, and or
just in your head. It's amazing how Control Z becomes almost like this kind of mental muscle twitch. Like I find it like it's, even if I'm nowhere near a keyboard. Yeah, I mean, I've done that as well. Yeah, when you're drawing and you're just, but the thing is that I've caught myself doing it even without a keyboard. Just like, there's this kind of spasm. I always wonder, like if somebody kind of like puts their skateboard over a cliff, in that moment where they've realized that they've gone over the cliff, are they doing the same thing? Are they thinking, Control Z, Control Z? I guess it says something about how our brains are. It's just become this reflex action.
Yeah, but I think tackling this deliberately with the right tool, I think is a very, very good method to actually jump over that gap.
Yes.
or kind of tackle this. So so this is why it actually helped me with a breakthrough. And it's okay. It's not going to look beautiful because it's literally just ink on paper.
I've never encountered a digital method of drawing that's kind of felt nice, just as a physical, tactile process.
Yeah.
Like a nib on a plastic or glass. There are ways you can, like, things that you can put over things for give a paper texture and stuff, and a fountain pen in particular, it just there's this feel, just this beautiful flow that you get with a fountain pen.
Yeah.
And the thing that with a fountain pen is that you can obviously press and kind of break the nib, cause the nibs to split and stuff, and which can be part of the effect if you want to do it. But there's something beautifully kind of, can't think of the right word. Organic's not the right word, and tactile's not the right word. But there's just something about the feeling of a fountain pen in particular for drawing.
You're also accepting a certain physical, haptical imperfection because the ink is not flowing always constantly. So you have to deal very consciously with imperfections of the physical reality, which helps with the process.
I mean, something else I really love drawing with is just a biro, like a really crappy biro. One where you get little lumps.
What's that?
It's like the cheapest. It's not a ballpoint. I don't know. It's a biro. It's like when you buy them in packets. It's like a plastic, just these kind of plastic pens.
Ball tip pen.
I think it's
kind of something like this.
Yes, something like that.
So it's basic ballpoint pen, and some of them are really cheap.
Yeah, and the cheap ones, the ones where like the ink flow is because like with a biro you can get faint. That there is a pressure thing in a biro that you don't get with a fountain pen.
All right.
So you can kind of like put a little bit of a pencil-y effect, but you also like biros are so inconsistent that you get, like you were saying with the fountain pen, it's like you're not 100% the master, and it just feels really nice. There are like lots of like little psychological tricks you can play on yourself, and one of them I never understand. Like you go to these art shops and you buy these beautiful sketchbook, like they're leather bound, and it's like it's like the pressure of drawing in one of those. That's a heart attack for me, right? It's not going to happen. Like I love it when you get these pads where there's like kind of 500 sheets of newspaper paper, like really super cheap, like stuff, and also which that paper tends to be like, it's quite absorbent, which means that you get, again, if you're drawing with a fountain pen and stuff, you get lovely kind of blotchy and stuff. But there's something about just like just all the stuff that you can do that is just removing like performance anxiety out of the process of drawing, right? Just so that you could. Do you mind a bit of product placement on your so you get those.
Go ahead.
You get those moleskin sketchbooks. The thing I hate about those is that the paper's really nice. If it was bad paper, like I could say kind of like, oh my god, it's overpriced, I'm never going to buy one of those.
It's too pristine to start.
It's too pristine, and there's all the, like, everyone uses them and stuff. There's but so I always, like, if ever I take out a moleskin sketchbook, I feel like this is branding me as a certain kind of person. No offense to moleskin people out there, having started off like selling moleskin books, and we're going to get royalties and stuff. Like, now it's just like I've just destroyed it. Like, only a certain type of person. But the thing is, like, the paper's really nice, and it does make a difference. Like, if it just the act of making the mark feels, I don't mean feels emotionally, but just feels nice. Yeah. It makes a difference. There's something nice about, like, those are the exceptions. Otherwise, only the cheapest sketchbooks with like crappy paper and lots of it. So I don't feel bad wasting paper. Yeah.
Imagine my pressure. So the fountain pen which I bought 2005 was actually a Mont Blanc pen, and because it was right for me back then. And since I would say a couple of years now, I bought some of those sketchbooks, or also Mont Blanc sketchbooks, just not because it's Mont Blanc, because it represents. For me, it's a good question, or a good thing. I never actually thought about what it means to me. It is much more about being deliberate, being very kind of concise, and it's exactly this feeling that I described before from when I was seeing my boss back then in 2004. It's like a very, very charismatic architect. He used to be an architecture professor also for quite a few years. There was this seriousness, but also a lightness and a profoundness and just strength within the process.
It's very zen. It's like when you watch the people doing kind of like the samurai kind of sitting there with the rose petals, and there's something in the moment, in control.
It's almost ritualistic.
Yeah. I get exactly what you mean. I kind of like friends of mine, artists who have that kind of background, architecture, industrial design, like people who they draw to describe something. But there's also, like you say, there's this profound intent behind what they're doing. Like it's not whimsical. Like it's like I have a friend who's a product designer, and I love watching him draw because of that deliberation. Because it's like, oh, how about this? And he can tell you why he's doing everything. It's like, no, like he's not done that curve that way because he felt like it. It's like it's a very precise, and I've always loved that.
I just had such a good example also regarding this, that showcases the same thing in a movie, and that was Denzel Washington's role in the movie The Equalizer. In all of them actually, but especially in the first one, where he goes at night, he goes to this cafe and he reads his book at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. because he cannot sleep. And then he always brings kind of just a napkin, unfolds it. He just orders hot water, nothing else, unfolds it. And then there's the tea bag that he brings to the cafe to use. And this is, it's also very, very ritualistic. Yeah, but I mean, we're just still at the beginning with all of the topics, but I love it. So let's talk a little bit about the lesser known aspects of your work. Are there things that you think are, or you would like to share about the experience, or that are really important to you, that are just not so known of the reality?
I don't know. I suppose I kind of talk to concept artist friends. We talk increasingly much less about kind of new tools and stuff like that, and we just talk about ideas a lot. That increasingly, I mean, particularly these days, I'm somebody who draws a lot, and 3D is a huge part of the industry now. I mean, it has been for a while, obviously. But I think 3D has affected the concept art industry in a sense that, like, whereas before, it's kind of pushed back when a client has to, or when an artist maybe has to commit to something. And the ability to change stuff on the fly now is something which clients and art directors increasingly expect. Nothing's final until the last moment. And something which I've been thinking about a lot recently is how you mentally adapt. You can learn tools. And of course, there's AI now. You can learn the new tools, but it's like, how do you adapt to just the way the industry is working at the moment? I know people who, they still just draw with a pencil and, they do nothing digitally at all. I imagine that would be an almost impossible thing if you were starting off now. Like you really have to be well established and the people are going to tolerate that kind of eccentricity. One of the lesser known things is, like, how do you just adapt mentally as the industry changes? And it's something I'm thinking about a lot, and I don't have the answers to. But particularly with the AI coming up, I think that's the thing. It's not just about doing the artwork or the ideas, how you move in the industry that you're in. It's going back to the art director discussion that we had, this distinction between like somebody who could just sit in an office. They won't be in an office, they'll be in a studio or an attic or something. And they're just producing artwork for and it's entirely what they want. They're tearing the brushstrokes out of their own flesh. The difference between those guys and somebody who's working as part of a team. If you're starting out, you just want to be a concept artist and you're following up artists on ArtStation and Instagram, and you're doing tutorials and you are learning the tool set, and you might be a fantastic artist. I think how the thing that they don't tell you, and the thing that you have to learn yourself, It's just how you operate in a group, how you have conversations, how you, like, if you're lucky, you will end up with people who you just get on with easily, and it's not such an issue. But it's a big industry full of very passionate, temperamental people, and it's how you navigate that. I think that's the less known part of it, which I'm learning all the time. I mean, I'm constantly confronted by these almost kind of back to kind of basics moments where it's like, wow, I have no idea what just happened in that personal interaction. And how am I going to adapt and solve this situation so that we can work together? And how do you talk to people without being without putting them off? Like, if you come into a studio and you've got loads of ideas, and like, you have to accept that people have been there before and they also have ideas and they've worked on this project a fair bit, and you're going to walk in with your no, let's do it like this. In a way, that's your that's kind of your job. Like, hey, this is my take. But like, how you approach that situation, how you respect the people who are there and what they've done and where they're coming from. And again, it's like, I had a thing recently which I won't go into, but just this example of like, wow, talk about like a conversation where we just kind of completely went past each other. And it's like how do you, there's the drawing side of communicating with people, but then there's just the working with people. And that is something which I think is seldom done. And then winding back, because this has been a stream of consciousness and an incredibly unstructured answer to your question, rewinding back to this thing of how do you work with people? And then there's tool sets and ways of working change. And it's like, how do you adapt? When do you adapt? When do you say, hey, you know what, this is not what I do? When can you afford to say, this is not what I do? How do you make those calls? Can you afford as an artist to say, I don't do 3D? Like, maybe if you're fantastic, you can render stuff amazingly and your drawing is beautiful. But then you come up against a scenario where they want 50 different angles and they want them by the end of the day. Or you have a client who, part of the process, I guess, is reassurance. You have like a producer who might not be a terrifically visual person, but they're going to put down however many millions of dollars on this thing, and they just want to know what they're buying. And that is another part of the concept art thing. Like, a beautiful piece of polished design work is not just a beautiful piece of design work, it's reassurance. A lot of clients, coming back to the sketches and the finished artwork thing, if you're working in a production, the rough sketches are fine, but it relies on somebody having the I'll say the imagination, but I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I mean, it's just like, they're used to looking at a sketch and kind of extrapolating what it will be like on screen. But the person putting down the money, they just want to know what they're buying and understanding that. And then there'll be some people who they will just go to the most photorealistic option because it's like they understand it. So it's like, maybe you need to learn to be photorealistic if you want to talk to those people. So there's tons of navigation issues and how you sell your ideas and how you talk to the most people. There's tons of that stuff that I think is not covered by the just doing the work.
Yeah, and especially every project is different. Larger budgets are more demanding in these regards. Then every person as an individual has different characters, has different moods throughout the days, or kind of if they go through a rough patch, they may also react differently. So there's so many dynamics going on. But I think to develop this like an intuition to read the scene and to also read to what's going on inside yourself, and then to be able to dynamically react, I think that's very hard, but I think it's also necessary. And kind of to want to break it down into a logical diagram, it's probably pretty much impossible.
And that's like artists are probably the worst people to kind of be doing this stuff. It's I speak as one. It's just like every now and then it's just like, oh my God, why can't you be more, just more logical? Why did you have to express yourself at that moment?
Well, it's the beautiful thing of the human condition. It has its pros and its cons. Its cons, right? But I mean, in your case, right, you mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, you've been working at multiple studios before, but also you've been for quite some time freelancing, which has its own set of challenges. And you're particularly exposed to those situations because everybody is a client, right? It's not just colleagues and coworkers, it's also clients. And so I wanted to dive a little bit into this and kind of also looking at it from a, let's say, contractual or IP, so intellectual property and business side. Just because some people in the audience may decide, hey, let's also start freelancing. So what would you say are some of the common pitfalls to avoid in general? And then maybe just go straight to who owns the sketches that you are drawing and who owns the copyrights of those? Let's just start with that.
So in terms of the copyrights, the client always owns the copyright. They're paying you, you're working for them. Everything that you produce, they own. If you're working on a big show, that means that a lot of stuff will never get seen. If you're working with a major client, say a Marvel or a Disney, who are very conscious of their IP, it means a huge amount of stuff that they will never let you put in your portfolio, which is frustrating. So what you can show is a negotiation and how far you want to push your contract in terms of what you can show. But in terms of who owns the IP, the client owns the IP, and they own the images, and they should hopefully let you show them so that you can find new work, but they own them. If somebody kind of comes to you online, as occasionally happens, and says that they want a piece of your artwork as an NFT, firstly, they're most likely a scammer. But secondly, it's like, no, you can't do that. You don't own that piece of work.
Yeah.
It's commercial work. The studio owns it. So that's kind of that. In terms of the pitfalls of freelancing, I mean, the plus sides first is that you obviously have more choice as to the kind of work that you do, the kind of jobs you want to go after, how long you want to stick on them, assuming they'll want you to stick around and they're going to pay you. But if you're working for a studio, you don't get to pick what you work on or for how long or for with whom. So that's the plus side of freelancing. If you are experienced and the market is good and you know the right people, you have a much more of a buffet of options. But those are all ifs. Like if the market isn't good, or if you're just starting out, you'll be restricted by just the fact that you have to earn money. And that's just the way it is. I think if you want to work freelance, there are obviously pluses and minuses, but I think my advice is that you have to cultivate your own attitude. Some people are better at not knowing where the next job is going to come from than others. And I think that's the thing to work on. It's like, you have to be able to accept, like kind of emotionally and psychologically, never mind financially, that you might not be working this month. I mean, over the period of COVID, the writers' strike, everyone I knew who was freelance, like people who've been doing it for years and years, everyone was out of work. People at studios were being let go as well. But again, it comes to that. Are you able to adapt and make your way with that? And I think that's going to be an individual thing. Like it's going to be what your temperament is, the kind of jobs you want to do. Do you value flexibility over stability? It's always going to be pluses and minuses. And that's really up to the individual artist.
Yeah. So regarding the contractual details, so obviously it's I would assume, because maybe the questions regarding this come across a little bit as naive, but I think it's important to just address them because they're really important. And one of the aspects is also, of course, you have to be very precise about the details of the contract before the project starts. And there's no way to kind of bend the rules typically after the fact. Kind of renegotiate after the work is done might be really, really tricky.
Yeah, I don't think you get a ton of flexibility, to be honest. I mean, you get to negotiate your salary, maybe hours and where you work from, depending on what their needs are. And again, depending on the production, they will accommodate you or not, depending on what they need. And again, nothing personal in any of this. But the general terms of the contract, stuff like who owns the artwork, I mean, that's not up for negotiation. It's like, do you want to work on this project? These are the conditions, and your choices are to accept them or not to accept them. But I mean, broadly speaking, like we're not talking about massively tyrannical conditions. It's like it's one project. You might be on a project that you're not liking very much. But as a freelancer, you have the flexibility to just, I mean, they can end at any time, but so can you if you want to. I mean, I wouldn't advise it. You don't want to burn bridges and stuff like that and just walk out when people need you. I mean, that creates problems for people, but of course it happens. But the broad terms of the contract, they're not going to change. And to be honest, in most cases, it doesn't matter. You negotiate your salary, you know the work you're going to be doing. There'll be stuff like where they want you based. Maybe they want you out in the studio that's nightmare to get to, or whatever, and you can maybe negotiate that or negotiate hours based around that. And in my experience, productions, again, so long as you're delivering the work, productions tend to understand. And again, coming back to kind of concept artist, art director type thing, like an art director needs to be there all the time.
Yeah.
Whereas the concept artist just needs to be there less.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like if you want those more senior roles, there's less of that kind of flexibility to negotiate those things. But broadly speaking, you'll know, right? We need somebody to do this. This is how much we're offering to pay you. It'll be roughly for this long, yes or no. And yeah, it's exactly what it says.
So for the case where, for example, an entire movie would be trashed, or that, for example, specific sequences that you are working on don't get into the final cut of the movie, are there rules that you typically put in place in a contract that deals with this so you can still get something out? Or is this usually or in a kind of limbo state?
Alas, no. I mean, you'll get paid, of course. The studio would say you've been paid, and that's, so far as you're concerned, is the end of your interest.
But for getting artwork, sketches, some of that stuff?
It's a massive problem. I mean, never mind projects that never get shown. The rules over the artwork that you can show have been tightened up massively in the last 5 or so years. Normally, some people ignore them or work around them. But in terms of what the studios say, it used to be the case that once the movie was out, you could show everything.
Yeah.
Now it's like the studio will want to vet what it is that you can show, and they're vetting less and less. You don't get any say in this. You have to choose how you want to navigate it. You can stick very consciously to the rules, you can ignore the rules and just show whatever you want. And it's very tricky because, like, as an artist, you have to show your work. It's how you get jobs, is to show your work. And if you're working for a studio, of course, where you are kind of like, much more under observation, then they will be even stricter on the work you can release and the work you can't. So that's one downside of working for the studio. But yeah, no, it's an issue that hasn't been settled, that studios generally are letting artists show less and less, and artists have to be able to show their work in order to get jobs. It's very tricky.
Again, also here, I think it's really important to address those issues. And I mean, this in itself may be a reason for certain people to say, hey, I'm going freelance, right? Potentially. Yeah.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, there's downsides to both of it. And also, like I think kind of for some, like, if you're producing tons of artwork and stuff outside the job, it might not matter so much. But yeah, it's definitely an issue, and it's a very contentious one.
Yeah, but also that there are, especially in the States, there are some work contracts that basically claim all the IP of everything that you are doing 24/7, whether it's at home or for work, because your work that you're doing in your spare time may have been inspired by the stuff that you saw at work. And so they're claiming absolutely everything. Right, and this is going even beyond the kind of, it seems outlandish, right?
Yeah, I think it's completely outrageous. Never mind outlandish. I have seen those contracts, again, like you decide if you sign it or not.
Yeah.
In my experience, like most companies are fairly reasonable with this stuff. I have seen instances where they want to own everything that you do, whether it was at work or not, whether it was inspired. I don't think the inspiration I don't know whether that's their reasoning, but I'm not entirely sure what their reasoning is in terms of why they should own work that you've done in your own time at home. But I think that's very rare. I don't think I've ever seen it or heard of an example of where it's been rigorously enforced, which doesn't mean it hasn't been, just I've never heard of it. But I think that's a relatively rare thing. I
mean, I know people personally that also have had these things in their contracts, but that this is even a thing is astounding, right? Yeah.
When I was starting off, I had an agent who asked for a 30% cut of everything I earned, even the work that they didn't actually get me.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah. So people would try it on. Like you have agency to kind of sign it or not sign it. I think once you've signed it, it's obviously a different thing. And of course, you might not have huge options in terms of like work and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot to, like it's very easy to say, oh, make a principled stand. But, people have to make a living. And, But I mean, broadly speaking, yeah, just read your contract and then again, decide whether it's worth it for you.
Yeah.
I don't think any freelance contract is ever going to get like that. Generally with freelancing, like you get paid a higher daily rate on the understanding that they might tell you that they don't need you tomorrow. And yeah, like the work you do is owned by them, but they make no claim to own anything you do outside work.
Yeah.
Maybe if you work for a studio which produces a lot of IP, they're more fundamentalist on that stuff. I'm not in any way a lawyer. I don't know what their grounds could be or what their reasoning is. But again, it's up to you if you sign it or not. If you do sign it, what happens then if you develop your own IP or something like that? I couldn't tell you. But yeah, I think the main thing is just to read the contract. And yes, of course, understanding that we don't always have tons of options.
Yeah, all right. So let's talk a little bit about 3D. You mentioned you've been doing a lot of doodle sketches, quote unquote 2D work. In the current industry, do you see a specific advantage to not know 3D, or to kind of just spin it somehow to say it leaves me more freedom, I am faster, some sort of kind of logical arguments to not use 3D much for work? We talked about that you want to get more and more also into 3D because it's kind of more state of the art. It may give you a more or a bigger arsenal of tools that you can leverage to do your work. But do you see specific disadvantages of using 3D in concept art?
No, not really. I think there's no disadvantages to knowing the 3D. It's an amazing tool set. You have stuff like Blender, which is an amazing tool set. It's a free piece of software that is world-class and at its best is like your own kind of little film set. There's always a cliche thing, you're limited by your imagination. But for me, it's like I'm limited by my ability to apply the tools. Right. The only reason I don't use 3D more is my own limitations. In terms of not so much like I've done lots of tutorials and all of that, but like understanding how you use the tools.
Yeah.
To come back to Yvonne for a second, she gave that talk on map painting when we were in Kenya. It struck me, I know all the tools she knows, but I don't know how to use them the way she uses them. And the 3D is like that. It's like kind of, I've done tons of tutorials and all of that. But again, it's just understanding the tools and knowing how to use them and not getting in the way. And the only reason I don't use the 3D more is that, to be perfectly frank, I don't know how to achieve what I want to achieve in the time I have with this tool set. So like if you say to me, do this job in 3D, I'll be thinking, okay, what do I know how to do in the time that I've got? And that just strikes me as an appalling way to start a job. And at least if I can imagine it, I can draw it. So, I mean, that's why I tend to stick with 2D, because it's like, for me, it's quicker. And for me, it means that I can worry about the ideas. Whereas if I was doing 3D, I'd be worrying about the 3D.
Yeah.
But that is purely my limitation. The tool set is fantastic. The people who I know who are much more comfortable with 3D can sketch and do all of this stuff and see possibilities in the 3D that I don't see. And as a tool that we were saying before, whether you draw with a biro or that 3D can have its eccentricities and its happy accidents and all of this stuff as well. If you know the tool set and you're comfortable with the tool set and you're open to the tool set, 3D is a fantastic tool set. And you don't get it much now, but like a slightly snobby kind of like, you're using 3D because like you can't paint it for real. And it's like, it's like kind of these people I see doing the 3D setups, their eye is fantastic, their sense of composition, their lighting, these kind of core fundamental things. Yeah. If you don't know those things, you're not going to be any good at the painting either, right?
Absolutely.
So it's an amazing tool set, and there's no downside to it at all. It's just a question of whether it works for you and whether you can apply it and use it for the job. One last thing on the 3D is like as a concept artist, and we talked about this a bit with your tools. As a concept artist, there are different approaches to 3D. Some people, they go in there and they build everything, right? It's a 3D world and you can put the camera anywhere, etc. And it's all in camera, and that's great. But as a concept artist, it's much more like a movie set, right? It's only what the camera sees that matters.
Yeah.
A friend of mine said that it's much more like a collage, that rather than stressing that your topology is not great, or that my lighting setup is, I've just stuck point lights everywhere till I get the effect that I want, rather than doing some kind of smarter, none of that stuff matters, right? Like it's just like a collage. And like if at the end of the day, your computer doesn't melt because you've got like a million point lights, ray tracing everything, as long as you get what you want out of it, it's great, right? Having worked in studios, something that you get a lot is that they, further down the pipeline, they'll say kind of like, can you send us your Blender scene since you've modeled everything already? And then they realize what awful car crashes of 3D these concept art Blender scenes are, because it only matters what the camera sees.
Yeah.
And it's fudged. And again, like the 3D artists I really admire, that they cheat like crazy. They just know how to cheat. They know the tool set that well that they know how to create the effect that they want, like quickly and cheaply.
Yeah.
And it's the end result that matters.
Yeah, but you can learn that only with experience, with testing the boundaries and kind of developing this intuition about what can I achieve, how the fastest. It's kind of know your tools, right?
I think you can also learn it when somebody just puts it in the correct way. Like my friend puts it, saying, think of it like a collage. For me was like this kind of revelation moment, because I'd been thinking about it like a 3D scene.
Yeah.
And the work that I was doing and the stuff that I was not achieving based on that approach, as opposed to like the collage approach of, like if I was modeling a scene where like you're standing on a hill and there's a valley and then there's castle on the other slope of the valley, I was worrying about the grass in that valley, and it's complete. It doesn't matter, right? Sometimes somebody just needs to say to you, no, look, your mindset is wrong. That yes, you need to know the tools and all of that, but sometimes somebody just changing your perspective makes a massive difference to learning something.
Just fantastic. Let's continue a little bit on this and go a bit towards this topic you mentioned quite early on already, the world building. So can you describe the typical collaboration with a film director at the very beginning of a movie? And maybe you can, I don't know, drop some names. Who did you work with, and what is the setting, and how often do you meet, and how does it start? How do you get into the whole flow of a process or of the process?
So a lot will depend on the project, when you come in, how the director wants to work. But the way I look at it is that the crucial thing to understand is that it's their film. You might well get a really collaborative relationship with the director where everything is kind of, yes, they have the final say, but like it's a conversation all the way. But it's important to understand, it's their film. And if you understand that, then it's just, what do they need for like the world building stuff? So firstly, you sit down, you have a conversation with the director, and then you go away and you just smorgasbord it, right? It's like, you collect tons of reference. You do lots of sketches. I call this the how about stage. It's how about this? Again, depending on the director, I don't want to mention names because they might have a completely different view of how it was.
All good.
Might be something like, so what's this world going to be like? And you'll talk about the effect they want to create. You'll talk about kind of like references. Often like in film, it is more about the effect you want to create, right? Like you're not going to go into like the extent to which you're worrying about what people are eating, whether they're using, what implements they're using is background detail and stuff. Like in a game, that would matter. But it's broadly like, broad strokes of like ideas. And you're not even thinking filmmaking at this moment. You're not worrying about cameras. It's just like broadly, hey, how about these ideas? How about this? And then you go away and you just collect tons of reference. You do lots of sketches. And then you come back and then you just talk and you pitch ideas. The director might like something, say, oh, no, not this. I like that. Let's explore this. How about this? How about we riff off this?
Yeah.
That will narrow it down, and then you go away and you do more work focusing on kind of stuff that they were talking about. And you come back and, you narrow it down. And nothing portfolio-y comes out of this. You might not even do any artwork yourself because you're just helping the director think. You're like a sounding board. You're kind of like providing material. You're providing ideas. You are just talking through their ideas and examining them. They'll say no a lot. No is important. It helps you. It's good to know what you're not doing. It's good feedback.
Yeah.
And you just workshop it and you workshop it and you workshop it and you workshop it until you've workshopped it enough. And then the director will kind of go away. And some of that stuff might end up in the script. It might end up in shots. It might end up in briefs for other concept artists who will pick stuff up. But it's basically, it's workshopping. It's helping the director workshop their ideas.
Just to drill into this a little bit. So what would you say is kind of an average, let's say, just to break it down very simply, kind of how many workshop sessions are this? What's the period of time that this process typically takes? Is it more like a couple of weeks or a couple of months? How often? And what is like literally the setting of the workshop? Is this a meeting in a studio or?
It's great if you can get in a room. With the pandemic, stuff is increasingly online.
Yeah.
I have found it harder to develop relationships with clients online. For one thing, it's all business, right?
Yeah.
And you don't get to know them a little bit, but also don't get to know their body language, their mannerisms. You don't get to read them. And that, I think, makes working with them harder. And again, leads to frustration that's not necessary. In terms of how long it takes, it varies. You don't want too long. Normally, like at the start, I'll get a brief, I'll go away for like a couple of days just to think about stuff and then just putting together like reference and sketches. And then you come back and then each iteration takes less and less time as you get closer and closer to kind of what you want. The thing is that you kind of need thinking time.
Yeah.
And you need time to just not producing anything, but just exploring and all of that. You have to kind of understand the process there. If you spent a day you're not producing anything, but that's not that you're not working. You're looking at reference, you're exploring ideas, trying to find inspiration, but you're not drawing or doing anything that you're going to show the client. I mean, like often I'll have days where like I'm gathering stuff, there's no real shape to it. And then like an hour before I'm going to talk to the client, I just like kind of stick it on a board with some kind of shape. And then when you talk to the director, like the more shape will come out of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot to do with just being able to talk to the director so that you can feel confident that you can show them a mess on the understanding that you will find the shape kind of a bit later. And again, it's like you're just workshopping ideas.
Yeah.
And I should say from this doesn't happen all the time or even most of the time on projects. If I'm working with a studio, the time I have is much more limited. It's a process that, particularly if you are in production, you can find frustrating because it's not noticeably moving the project forward. Even though it's determining stuff for the future and will save you a lot of time and trouble later down the track if you solve these questions now. I think at the moment it looks like you're just sitting around, staring at the ceiling. I would never actually do the ceiling staring in the office. I think you don't want to be seen to be doing that. I suppose typically like a few weeks. Depending on what it is that you're doing and how specific the brief is. One example on the Fantastic Beasts film, the brief was that Newt's commander goes into his suitcase and there's his little kind of menagerie. And it was just like ideas for the menagerie. And this was a case where there's some stuff that's in the script. There's some stuff that, this is working with Framestore, the animation supervisor, Pablo, was coming up with ideas and was just drawing them on little Post-its. I'm doing the same thing, just coming up with ideas. And there's feedback between those two things, which we kind of creature casting, where it was like Pablo's brief would just be, I feel we need a gag here. So the brief would be like a funny creature. And Pablo would come up with the idea like, what if there's a creature that's like when you see that footage of people who've like raised lions and like the lion runs up to them and jumps on them and everyone else is thinking, oh my God, this guy's dead. But the lion is hugging him and all of that stuff. And so Pablo's idea was like, what if that's the brief, right? Like it's a Fantastic Beasts equivalent of that. Like you go in and there's a creature in there that's really, really dangerous, but which Newt has tamed. So what was that? And you go away, do some sketches for that. So that's like an example of like, it starts off very, very broad. And then just through the process of sharing ideas, it becomes boiled down. And then eventually you get a very specific creature brief out of it. And these were all kind of space fillers, like, like the hero creatures, like the Erumpment and the demiguise and creatures that are like kind of like major story parts. They're in the script and they're briefed and they are separate design projects. Whereas the world building stuff is more the incidental stuff. It's like, like he sees this, he sees that. What's this space going to be like? So that's an example of how that can possibly work. Oh man, there's a lot of projects I can't talk about because they're not out yet. The Fantastic Beasts was like a good example where there was very often a certain gap in the script. And like most of the time, like 90% of the time, nothing comes of it. But it was just like, let's explore this. So there's one where it's like kind of the character has to go through like a dangerous space. And what makes it dangerous? And so we just explored ideas as to kind of like what would make it dangerous. Creatures, environment stuff. Again, rough sketches, 99.9 of them never go anywhere. But you're just a quick sketch. How about this? How about this? How about this? And the director's like, no. Yeah. No. It's that kind of stuff. It's just a little bit before it becomes concept art, because I think like it can sound like what I'm describing is just concept art, like just drawing lots of creatures, but it's a little bit more exploratory than that, because it's more about how's it going to work and what kind of story beats do we want. So there's a bit of storyboarding in there as well, because it's like some of these creatures say things like, we want a quick read. like the pufferfish lion in the first Fantastic Beasts film. Again, like an example of like, they just wanted, it's like that there was a brief, there was like a beast that's in the book called the Nundu, and it's got toxic breath. So the idea was like a toxic lion, but there's also this element of they don't just want this thing, with bad breath. They kind of, want this, they just want a read, like a trick that it can do. And it's got to be really quick. You've got like a few seconds to do this. It started off with just thinking that the pufferfish and the lion's mane, they have a similar quality to them, with the spines. And so it started off with just a lion with, I think that the thought process was, okay, toxic fish. Look at that. That's, this pufferfish. I can't remember if they're toxic or not, but that's kind of similar to like a lion's mane, right? So what if like, we put that kind of quality onto the lion, and then from that came the idea that when it roared, it would be flat, and when it roared, it would just puff up. And again, it was just a quick read kind of creature. And then Sam Rowan, who's a good friend and a great creature designer, did the design of the creature, and it was a really fun one. Yeah, that's kind of like an example of how it would work. So that you start off with like, we have an empty space. What's going to go into this empty space? Lots of ideas as to what could go into the empty space. Conclusion is like, okay, we want like here, we want like a quick read creature. Here's a quick, how about this Nundu thing from the book? It just needs to be a little bit more interesting than just hanging around. So you come up with this pufferfish thing, and then in the film you see this lion and it comes on and it roars and its neck goes, well, it's just like it's a nice little moment, and that's kind of how it would work.
Very cool. Short ago you mentioned that some of the work that you are doing together or in these brainstorming sessions actually have an influence on the script. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, on the typical process? So kind of, is it common that the film script is basically set and then the director just kind of, or has it written or together with the writers, and they basically said, this is the script, let's just kind of execute and just create the world of what we read in this script? Or that the script actually is kind of constantly refined and based on the input that the director gets from the process, as you just described in this brainstorming process, that this influences pretty much every aspect or portions of the script?
Well, I want to be very clear that no, I'm not contributing to the writing of the script. Obviously, the script writer and the director are responsible for that. To how they collaborate, again, that's a thing between script, depending on the particular working thing, and also who's making the show. Like, if it's a big studio show, there's going to be a lot more input. Script writers, like any other artist, like you can choose to be kind of just write what you want to write and hope somebody's going to want to buy it. Or if you're going to work in a big studio setting, there's going to be lots of feedback and you're not going to be your own master. But I'm definitely not impacting or affecting the writing of the script. Certainly not when it comes to kind of character arcs or stuff like that. What you might do at best is just provide ideas and like more call it color than character moments, or at least character arcs, say. You're not writing the story, but you're just saying, oh, how about this? How about that? Almost you've been in a fantasy setting, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just providing kind of background color, some of which might end up more front and center, but mostly it's just helping flesh out the world and providing bits of inspiration, but you're not writing the script. Where it changes a little bit is they will have a hole in the script, which will be an action sequence, say. I think that's where, and not just the kind of stuff I do, but like kind of concept art in general might fill the gap more.
Yeah.
It's something where it's like, it's more about the visuals than, any story type things. I think that's when there's more feedback between visual departments and the script writer. I mean, again, this Fantastic Beasts example is a good one. The script is written, they go down into the box, and it's like, generally what from a character beats point of view, what's happening in that scene. Kind of Newt is showing his new muggle friend around, and the muggle friend is amazed by all that he's seeing. And your job is to provide what he's seeing. Again, there's some pointers in the script, but generally the question is, okay, so like he's going to go in there, what's the muggle going to see? And it's developing ideas within that. And which will include some character moments. Like I said, this thing of Pablo's, of this notion is kind of intruding into the writing a little bit. It's like it's creating a character moment for Newt, but it's not one which the scriptwriter might necessarily, they wouldn't come up with it, but it's just like in this instance, it was just provided by this process of exploring what this world is going to be like.
Oh, so fascinating. Now, you mentioned that you worked also on game IPs in the past, kind of comparing the...
Not so much. Not so much games.
Not so much, but I think you mentioned at the beginning you're involved in kind of in some of the, let's say, game artwork, or at least you know about it a bit.
When I was really starting off, I did some stuff on computer games, but it was always artwork and never really got into the IP aspects of things.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I misspoke on that one. But yeah, basically what I wanted to go towards is kind of comparing the process, the creative process to design movies and games. Do you see a lot of parallels? Do you see specific differences in the process?
I think certainly with games, the massive difference is that everything has to be designed. Like in a film, let's say you're doing Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm.
There will be stuff that's designed, and then there'll be stuff that's kind of rented, and stuff that you've just found and all of that. And it will be a collage of that stuff. If you're doing like a feast in King's Landing, the art director has gone out and chosen, like they've not made every cup and saucer and spoon. Some stuff has been built from scratch, and then some stuff has been purchased to look appropriate. And, I know a lot of medieval purists who will be amazingly annoyed if they find, that particular kind of spoon didn't come in until the late 1600s. What's it doing in a world that's clearly supposed to be 100 Years' War or whatever? I do know people like that. But broadly speaking, projects which have a bigger budget, I watched some documentary on The Hobbit, where they just have tons of money, and the particular environment in which they're making those films just gives them tons of flexibility. And the amount of stuff that they're designing and building from scratch, it's bespoke, is amazing. And the result is an amazing looking world. But most productions don't have that. I think in a game, you have to design everything. Maybe you might get certain things like spoons and forks you might go and buy from, but generally speaking, you have to model everything. So that means everything has to be designed. And so kind of the concept art, the art department will be much bigger. It will be much more varied. You will have people who are just doing props, people who are just doing spoons. If you're doing something like Fallout or the Elder Scrolls, everything has been designed. There will be people who are doing environments, like broad sweep environments. There are people who are just doing weapons, people who are just doing creatures, people who are just doing the most mundane props. And again, the art director making sure that it all comes together in a kind of cohesive way, and that there's a big picture vision to it, which creates the aesthetic.
Yeah.
I think that's the main difference.
So you would say kind of the craftsmanship and the process in itself is similar / comparable. It's just the magnitude is different.
Well, I think because in the games, everything is going to be modeled. I'm speculating here because I don't know a huge amount about games production. But if you're in film, say you'll be doing concept art, which is a guide for visual effects. So it's like, this shot is going to be comped. There's going to be a set extension. This is what this is going to look like. You will do design work, which is a prop. This has to be built. And so it's going to go and it's going to be turned into plans and elevations. It's going to be modeled. It's going to be constructed for real. And again, the for real has a double thing, because it's like, it's not just going to exist physically, but it has to work. Like you have to get cameras in and out of it. And all of that stuff. And because it's film, it only matters what the camera is seeing. Whereas in a game, you don't know where the person's going to look. So I think that's another aspect of it, that the game has to be a complete world where they can look any direction that they want and kind of go anywhere. At least, again, using like an Elder Scrolls game as an example, where that's their USP, is that, like if you can see it, you can go there. And that understanding that you have to design everything and the world has to work. If you're going to create a world where every building you can go inside, every building has to work. If it's going to be like a watermill, the inside of that watermill has to look like a watermill. Like, like it can't just be a space. So there is a difference in the amount of work that's being done, but there's also a difference in usage. In a film, it's all building towards producing shots which will be edited into a sequence. And so the artwork serves different purposes. You might do like kind of rough sketches and stuff where you're just looking at camera angles or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's going to be, what are we doing? What's this film going to look like? And then there's artwork which is contributing to the how we're going to achieve what we're going to achieve. Whereas with games, it's like, yes, you're designing everything and everything is going to be built in 3D. I imagine because it's being built in 3D, there's a more immediate kind of thing. Like, you're sitting in the same office as the people building the 3D. I imagine that there's less of that kind of architectural element. Like if you go into like an art department in a film, there will be people doing, there'll be draftsmen doing plans and elevations, because these are going to go to people who are going to have to actually produce it. I imagine that there's a slightly more gray area or a softer transition between like the concept artwork and the built game assets, I imagine. But yeah, there's a lot more of it. And yes, you're designing everything and it all has to work. I think those are the big differences. Another thing with games is that in a film, it's purely what the director and the art director wants you to see. But in a game, people are changing their hair, they're dressing up in different ways. The player choice as to how they customize their characters is a massive thing. This also means that you are providing a lot of options within that art-directed world.
Yeah, that's a really important point. That absolutely makes sense. And they also have to be crafted to be kind of compatible to the individual characters of different sizes and so on. Yeah, no, that's absolutely valid. That's a really important point. Piggybacking also on those points, one detail that you mentioned when we were talking in Kenya, in Nairobi, is one of the special aspects is the practicality of your work or of the concepts or of the designs that you're providing. The practicality in the sense that they actually really work and support the story in a kind of non-intrusive manner. And so the specific example that you gave me, and I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on that. It was on Wonka, and it was kind of one of these cupboards or kind of, I'm not sure what it was again, but it has moving parts, and it served a specific kind of purpose, but there were completely different designs, and some are more feasible, some are less feasible. Can you walk us through that process?
In the film, Wonka has a suitcase which unfolds into a portable chocolate laboratory. And this was in the script from the earliest kind of iterations of it. I worked on the original, I did some work on the pitch, which Paul, the director, was going to make to the studio. And these sketches were part of that pitch, that this case was like a hero item. It was like an exciting, kind of unique, fun thing. And they wanted to make a big deal of it. A lot of those drawings, there were kind of examples of how is this scene going to work? Is he going to sit down at the desk and open it like a laptop? So it would be like a classic old school briefcase. You just sit down and you open it up. Is it going to be more of a performance thing? You'd press it and it would be, kind of, and it would all just like kind of explode in different directions. I mean, Paul, the director, is big into music. And so the rhythms of how that stuff works is very important to him. He wants to get that kind of thing. You've got to tread carefully here because, again, Paul is the director. He's the one who's going to direct the scene. Yeah. You talked about like, okay, how would this work in real life? So there's an option where he just takes it and he shakes it and legs. So he starts off standing, he shakes it, legs come out. He pops down. So it goes from being a suitcase to being kind of waist height, and then he expands it and it kind of accordions out and he's got this massive long workbench. So that was one option. Another option is that he sets it up in front of him and he opens it, and it opens like a cupboard, and he's got stuff on either side, and then something folds down and you've got like his little Bunsen burner there and stuff like that. The laptop option. And there's tons of stuff to think about. What's the rhythm of the scene? What's the impression that you wanted to get? Like the notion of like, just the guy opening his laptop. I mean, is that what the scene is going to be like? Or is it more that, he's trying to show off to this girl he's met, and so that it has to be a more elaborate opening up? How much time is there? How much space? Like a lot of the ideas were nixed just because it's like there's not that much space.
Yeah.
Or because it's going to take too much time. I mean, I think the accordioning idea, it was too fussy, and Paul wanted something which was more musical, I think, in terms of having a rhythm to how it opened up. There's all of these questions that you explore, which are not just what's it going to look like, but it's how is it going to perform? What's the impression that you want it to make? What's it say about Wonka, the character? What's the gag? And then there's the practical elements of he has to work on this. He actually has to do the job. Again, what's the performance of that? Is he going to look for ingredients and then he reaches out and he just pulls up a little kind of telescopic thing of ingredients? It's like, do you want that kind of thing? Like, are there going to be lenses he looks through? And if so, are they going to be built in? Is it something that he has separately? Those are the kind of discussions that you have. And you do lots of rough sketches. And the practicalities are, it's like we have to build it. Definitely it's going to be practical. How much space he's using it in, at least at that moment in the script, in like a small attic room he's kind of rented. So there's not huge amounts of space to do stuff. It's supposed to be a gag, but it doesn't want to kind of like overstay its welcome. So like it's not going to be a stupidly elaborate, multiple stage thing. It's going to happen in a couple of seconds. It's those kind of practicalities, as well as the kind of how abouts of it all.
I find this super fascinating, and it's eye-opening to the complexity of the whole process, right? And so how often does it happen that, for example, certain designs that, for example, a director sees and absolutely loves. Let's look at this suitcase that you just mentioned, something like that, and absolutely loves the idea, but also has an understanding of let's assume that this has to be built either fully practical as a practical element that was completely designed, but has to be literally fabricated to be a physical object that bends and whatever does its thing on a physical set, or in the digital realm that is kind of you just have a physical, I don't know, green object like a green cube or something that then is being replicated just as a completely digital visual effect later on. And where designs that the director, for example, absolutely loves, but says it's going to be way too expensive to either build physically or it's going to be too expensive to create it digitally because of rigging, because of modeling, because of kind of the aspects of complexity that make some of those inventions, let's say, too expensive to actually produce. Are these also factors that you try to consider, or is this something that you constantly have in mind that influence also your designs?
Not so much. I think kind of that kind of stuff is really up to the director. My job is just to help the director kind of develop their ideas. There might be a producer or VFX supervisor there present who'll go, "Are you insane? This will bankrupt us." In the case of the suitcase, I mean, Paul is very precise. He's always guiding it to where he wants it to be. And so there's not a ton of wasted material when you're working with him. I think something like Fantastic Beasts, I think there's a lot more stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor due to, I mean, all sorts of reasons. I mean, again, there's lots of levels of approval, right? You know, like the director has to approve it. J.K. Rowling has to approve it. The studio has to approve it. Like a big project, there's tons of stuff going on, which is not just the film the director wants to make.
Yeah.
I think kind of it's within reason. It's generally something that I don't need to worry about that much because we're just talking about ideas. And normally if something's not possible, if they want it, they'll figure out a way to do it. And if they don't want it or it's just impractical in the budget or whatever, it will get nixed fairly early on. I don't think there's very often a moment, say, where like the guy comes in from the studio and kind of executes your idea in front of you because it's gone out of hand and has become a monstrosity. You know, like in most instances, you just know it's like it was fun and it was worth talking about, but you know it's not going to be there and it just gets quietly kind of put out to pasture. And again, that's part of the process. And the advantage of the rough and conceptual way of working is that you can make those decisions before you spend a lot of money. You can indulge yourself as much as you like when it's just pen and ink.
Yeah, if there were constraints that they were aware of, they could brief you from the beginning, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have to be sensible as well. If you listen to the brief and you are sensible of the project you're working on, you're aware of a lot of those restrictions. If the director comes to you and says, look, this is a low budget kind of film about a woman going mad in like a small flat in downtown Antwerp, and the whole thing's going to be shot one camera, one room, one actress, and I just want something creepy, and you go away and you come back with, how about an enormous monster rips the front off the building and then just vomits an army of undead zombies into the room, and then she has to fight them using the superpowers that she's acquired from a crystal that fell from the sky in a comet earlier on in the movie. You're just going to get fired straight away. Right? You know, it's like if you're that kind of like, you didn't listen at all to what the director asked. Yeah, you're not going to last. I don't care how great the ideas were. It's like, yeah, you've got no business being on that film.
Oh, I love the example. Amazing. So what would you say, what's the essence to create a story that is actually meaningful? I mean, that's kind of more going into the footsteps of the director, but I mean, you've seen so much, you have so much experience in this field. What's the essence to make something or a story actually meaningful?
Wow. I think for me, it's kind of human moments. You have to find those human moments in stuff. In many ways, I kind of feel a bit despairing when there's a massive gap in the script and it says, we want an action scene here. Because however cool the action scene is, if there's no meaning or jeopardy for the characters, it's going to be bland. I don't care how exciting it is. Not wanting to... I'm treading carefully because I don't want to lose any jobs in the future. But you see a lot of films, TV series, where it's like, the villain and the hero will have countless contests throughout the film. Yeah. And there's no prospect that either of them's not going to make it, right? And so there's no jeopardy. Nothing's going to change. There's no shock moment. Yeah. And so I think, however cool and stuff the visual effects and the scope of the story, it comes down to those human moments. Yeah. And I think that's what makes stuff kind of meaningful. I mean, you can have like big philosophical kind of films as well, but I think kind of the impacts are those human moments. If you look at something like Game of Thrones, I think the reason Game of Thrones was so good when it was at its peak was that everything was so consequential. Yeah. Like anyone could die at any time. Yeah. And although it became towards the end a little bit of almost a joke that that this person that you like is going to die horribly because that fact, like how precarious it was, and that they never lost sight of the personal in this, and of that ability to kind of pull out, look at the big picture, and then zoom in and see the individual effects. I mean, I think that's what made that show at its best so effective. Yeah, like it has to be about the drama, because otherwise you end up with these incredibly bland things where people are just running at each other and they're fighting, and that it's just a fight. Yeah. Like there's going to be no outcome, no consequence. So yeah, I think it's about bringing it back to those human moments.
Just this weekend, I saw Twisters with some friends, and in the end, when we walked out of the cinema, we were like, how can you, I mean, spoiler alert, but yeah, it's exactly that, right? The chemistry between the characters was so weak and such almost cringe-worthy, in my personal opinion, cringe-worthy story arcs, people that are completely redundant in the story. And so it was just mind-blowing to see kind of how far a story was reduced to just a shell.
Yeah, it's the opposite of mind-blowing. It's kind of mind saying exactly where it is, inert state. Yeah, I completely agree. And again, you admire the writers, particularly in TV. I'm always amazed when people have been over a year. I don't know when the writing process starts on a big TV show, but you have something like Succession or, again, Game of Thrones at its peak, Sopranos, The Wire, God, when they were producing 10 or so hours of the most enthralling personal television is astounding. It's not at all an easy thing to do. I mean, you just have to it's not a question of action sequences or of world building, but what makes it work is that you care about the human moments, land, the tragedy of it, the excitement of it. That's the stuff that you kind of watch it for.
All right. We've already been talking quite some time. I would say let's slowly come towards an end. Let's just very, very briefly kind of go into completely other things. One of the things that I saw on your LinkedIn profile, it says freelance concept designer, story/development artist, also does parties. I was blown away. Sounds a little bit shady. What do you mean by also does parties? Do you organize them or do you attend?
I should say straight away, no, I don't do parties. I can't remember quite when I wrote that, but I imagine I was just trying to be funny.
You succeeded. It's just amazing.
Normally I'm told that I should not try to be funny because it kind of ruins friendships and ends part. In fact, if there's one thing I've learned, is that my sense of humor can end a party very quickly. So yes, no, I don't do parties, I'm afraid. Although in these tight economic times, if anyone does want a party conceptualized, with world building and an incredibly conceptual but probably inedible cake, I would be more than happy to take on that task and art direct.
Oh, this is amazing.
Actually, talk about parties. When I was a kid, I used to like making cakes. So, like, not baking them, but Like we'd get like these slabs of just plain Madeira cake, and I would build up a block of the bricks of these, and then I'd carve it. And my younger brother was having a Jaws themed swimming birthday party, and so I carved him a shark out of Madeira cake, and it had like sweets for teeth, and it was full of his action men, and that was all fine. But it was also painted with a huge amount of food coloring, and this was a swimming party, and the result was a huge amount of vomit. So maybe I shouldn't be arranging parties. This was a long time ago. Like I would have been like, I don't know, 8 or 9. But I just remember like the aftermath of this, of one being very proud of this Jaws cake, and then of just everyone getting very sick because of the like I just wanted it to be the right color, right? So it was just like food coloring, and yes, the result was like kind of like just carnage.
This is cool. This is so cool. So otherwise, other hobbies you're doing, kind of traveling. I mean, I know you have a tremendous amount of knowledge or in many, many different fields. Like you must have read a lot. So kind of what's beyond work? What are the things that you indulge in?
Hobbies-wise, I fence. We talked about Phil and Yvonne and doing the martial arts with them. I didn't find another teacher after Phil. After they left Australia, I tried out various other sports, and I lighted on fencing. And fencing is like I had like my first fencing match, and it was just like, yeah, this is amazingly good fun.
Oh, cool.
And so that's my sport. I do that like 3 times a week, and I coach on weekends the little kids at my club, which is good fun. So yeah, that's my main hobby outside work.
Nice. And kind of now going into the future, are there like new projects, new endeavors, new things going on? What's exciting things coming up?
I have a few projects that me and some friends are trying to get going. A friend of mine, we have a horror film idea, which we are developing with artwork and are hoping to find a budget for. Producers looking for good horror film ideas should contact us. And then I'm talking to Yvonne all the time. I mean, for those who I don't know if you did a podcast on this. So Yvonne is based in Kenya, and she's very interested in how to kind of like make the film industry work in Kenya. And one idea that we've been talking about is trying to make some projects down there. And yeah, I suppose my focus, or at least where I want to be increasingly, is I want to be making stuff, like actually kind of making stuff, as opposed to sitting behind a desk and just thinking about things. And I think this is partially just a result of the pandemic, where things have become much more desk based. There are these film ideas I'm developing, and I'm hoping through talking with Yvonne that we can do something in Kenya as well.
That's super fantastic. I'm gonna keep an eye on those activities. Super cool thing to do. Very, very cool. Yeah, but I would say let's go to the final 3 questions that I always ask, and then we can wrap it up. So if you have one book to recommend that everybody should read, which one is it and why?
This is a tricky one. So I'm just going to say one which has had a personal effect, which was, I suppose it's not really a book, it's a poem. And it's Beowulf. It's a kind of Anglo-Saxon epic poem. Had a massive influence on the Lord of the Rings, a massive influence on Tolkien in general. And for me, I remember firstly having it read to me when I was a kid, like a young kid, and the effect it had in terms of just the images it created in my head, the feeling it created in me, the stuff it made me want to do, which was draw stuff as opposed to get an axe and start hunting for hunting for monsters. That as well, but it's hard to do that in North London. Just the emotional effect it had on me in terms of how it made me feel, and I think kind of that led me to like Lord of the Rings and Tolkien and stuff. And one of the things I love about Tolkien is the ambience. It's just this kind of feeling his writing creates. It's not just the world, it's the language and how he structures the language. And that goes back to the fact that he was a professor of Old English, and poems like Beowulf There's this line in Beowulf, Grendel's not the monster, who kind of first comes in, and it says, in off the moors, down through the mist bands, God-cursed Grendel came greedily loping. A fire like hell burned in his eyes. And I have a picture, or at least my mum has a picture, which I did when I was like, I don't know, eight or something like that. Actually, probably younger, based off that line in the poem, which I had a teacher who read it to me at school. I think about it, it's probably like not age appropriate, but who cares? I think for me, like, it didn't profoundly affect my philosophical outlook of the world, but it had a massive effect on how I saw the world, and it's kind of a feeling I've been chasing ever since. It really implanted with me a love of just how it carried me off somewhere. I think it's something which, like, it's harder to do as an adult, but the effect that it had on me will influence everything I've done since. And yeah, it's something I'm always chasing.
That's very nice. I'm looking forward to reading that one. All right. If you could change one thing on this planet to make it better, what would that be?
I think that's almost an impossible question, because like, I think you just don't know what the downstream consequences of stuff is. And I don't mean that in a kind of a Back to the Future kind of way, but like, it's just that nothing's simple. And so it's easy to say kind of, I wish so-and-so didn't exist, or that this had never happened, but you just don't know what the consequences are. It would be good if we listened to each other more. Like, if people just had more imagination and a greater willingness to see other people's points of view and to compromise with each other. I think the world will be a much better place for that.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think at the moment, it seems to me that certainly, I don't know about how things are in Switzerland, but like certainly in the UK and in America, it seems to me that politics is driven by hating the other person more than by any particular desire to make things better.
Very true. Very, very true. And the last question. Who would you like to see as a guest on the 3D Environment podcast?
Wow. I mean, Lyndon, I think, would be an interesting. Have you asked? So for, again, Lyndon, I'm not sure how you say his surname either. Barros was an animation supervisor on.
We briefly talked about him. Not yet. I mean, yeah.
I think it would be interesting. So his background is stop motion animation. Like he did art. He started doing he has this wonderful. It's a rapper, and he does these animations. Yeah, he does stop motion animation, right? using chewing gum wrappers, because they have like a foil interior which gives him an armature and a paper exterior which he can paint. And from that he got into kind of animation supervision for films like The Matrix and Happy Feet. I think that difference in background, I think, would be really interesting, because it's good to have different perspectives. So somebody like Lyndon, somebody whose background is maybe in the industry but is just not of the industry, I think that would be really interesting.
Very cool. Noted. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, anything last that you would like to address?
No, I think this has been good fun, and yeah, it's been great talking to you. Good to see you again. And yeah, hopefully it won't be the end of the conversation.
No, definitely not. No, I wanted to reach out to you because I knew that we will have a very good, deep conversation, just addressing some of the things that are not very often talked about. I love doing these things, and it's been an absolute pleasure to do this, to take the time and kind of, just explore. So that's also from my end. It's been fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Yeah. Then I would say we are wrapping it up.
Excellent. Cool. It's been great. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.